everyone. Welcome to Women Empowered Live, where we gather weekly to discuss all of life's challenges and different things that come up. I am Victoria Gracie.
And I'm Eve Gracie. We are sister-in-laws, and we are also co-creators and head instructors of the Women Empowered Self-Defense Program. And we are especially excited this week because for Women Empowered Live, this is the first time we are going to have a guest join us. And we've been wanting to have guests for a long time, obviously due to the nature of where we're at in the world. We don't have guests in person, but we are going to be having Bryana Kappa join us today for our first Zoom live Women Empowered Live.
Yes, and Bryana is a very special human being because when I found her, I actually found her on Instagram, and I know I find a good one when everything she's posting, I'm liking and reposting. She is a certified marriage and family therapist who runs the South Bay Mommy and Me program, and she does this with the full-heartedness of the idea of conscious parenting, conscious discipline, and all respectful nuances of goodness. She endorses in an infant, family, early childhood mental health specialist. She's endorsed, specializing in the care and support of infants, toddlers, and their families. And her private practice in Redondo Beach is South Bay Mommy and Me. And if you have never heard of it, she also offers Zoom classes online, which means you don't have to be here in Redondo Beach to take them, which is fantastic. If you follow her, she posts those quite often. She has a passion for teaching and for supporting moms in every way. And I really connected with that. And it's why we are bringing her on. And she has a special interest, which is also why I love her, in trauma and how it impacts our attachment to our children. So I proudly introduce the most loving mama expert we know, Miss Bryana Kappa.
Oh, thank you guys so much for having me, both of you. I'm so grateful to be here and to be sharing these messages on conscious and reflective parenting with your audience. Yes, that's all correct. I'm an infant, family, early childhood mental health specialist. My private practice focuses particularly on new mothers who are navigating the transition into motherhood, as well as families with very young children under the age of 5. My hope in the practice is that we can foster and develop healthy, strong attachments, which I believe a healthy, strong attachment is the framework that we use for the rest of our lives going out into the world. When we have it's so much more than a strong bond, by the way, but when we have a foundation of safety, of feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling loved and validated and honored and respected and understood, we then go out into the world and we learn how to give this to others. We also learn how to respect these really important needs that we have for ourselves. So I'm really excited to talk about that and hear what your questions are and dive more into that.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes. So we wanted to bring Bryana in today specifically to ask a few questions that are often asked to us as self-defense instructors. And one of the most common questions that we ask is the title of this segment that we're doing is how to raise an empowered child. So people often come to us and say, you know, how can I get my child? My child is such a nice, I've raised my child to be really respectful and really polite, but my child does not stand up for him or herself. And so how can I help my child to learn to set boundaries and stand up for herself or himself? And so we have our own kind of obviously self-defense aspect kind of perspective on this, but we would love your perspective on this question, Bryana, because I think that they're definitely intertwined. And so we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and before we go to you, Bryana, because that is such an important thing that, again, we really want to know, I want to just remind everybody at home who's watching, I want to invite you into this space with us where we're exploring these ideas that might feel different to your mind. And in fact, it might feel foreign to even hear some of the stuff that Bryana or we might validate or bring up as options. And I say that because we're inviting you to maybe open your heart and your mind when you come into this space for this moment for today. Much of the reason why we brought Bryana in is because of what I believe, like the opposite ideas that she has to traditional types of parenting. And so if I could just basically invite people to open our hearts and our minds to maybe some new ways of thinking and to even hold off on the feelings of like oh, I didn't do it that way, so I must be doing it wrong, or even I don't want to do it that way because I'm doing it right. Like it just come in and go, I wonder what they're doing. It's like an aquarium. Like what is happening in there? I'm open to hearing someone else's way of doing these things.
That's a great point. Yeah. And even, yeah, before we get into that, actually, Bryana, I would love your thoughts on this. And when you're working with especially new parents or even parents who have been in the parenting game for a while and are maybe trying to find new perspectives on how to approach their families and their relationships with their children, how do you make this approach, and how do you help parents kind of allow that space to open up their mind for either forgiveness or grace or just having open-mindedness with themselves?
Yeah, it's such a good point and such a great question. It is so critical that when we're having any conversation that challenges us, that we meet that conversation without judgment of ourselves, without judgment of others. It's very easy to cast a stone. It's very easy to even judge our own childhood and how we were raised. What I like to do as a mental shift is instead imagine I'm holding space for my experiences. There is a reason why we behave the way that we behave. There's many reasons. We've got social conditioning, we've got cultural conditioning, we've got our family conditioning from just being little tiny kids, now growing up into being adults. And so anytime we are finding ourselves feeling challenged, what might be going on underneath the surface is some shame. We might be starting to recognize, I should have done this. Well, every time you have a should, there's some shame that's following after that. We want to be cautious and careful to not shame ourselves, because that's going to keep us in a mental state of closed-mindedness, actually. It's not going to allow us to really open up to what we are, I think what our hearts are really desiring to do, which is to, in Brene Brown's words, to live wholeheartedly, which means I'm going to embrace what makes me strong, and I'm going to appreciate that, and I'm going to embrace my weaknesses, and I'm going to appreciate that. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and that's what makes humanity so special. It's the kind of what weaves that framework and keeps us all connected, that we have different gifts and different talents to give, and that is a really beautiful thing. So I like to combat shame with gratitude. What am I grateful for? And maybe that is, I'm grateful for the opportunity to hear something different and see what resonates with me. Most important thing I tell parents all the time, there are experts in child development. There are experts in mental health. There's experts in everything, but there is no other expert in your child than you. And there's no other expert in you than you.
Oh, that's so great, Bryana. I've never actually heard someone say it that way. Like, there is no expert in me than me. And here we are going out and trying to seek all these other experts and say, tell me what's wrong with me. Fix me. Tell me what to do. And people are like, but you're the only you. Like, you know you. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, so what I was saying was a lot of parents come to me wanting a script or wanting to know a step-by-step action plan of what to do to raise the children that they desire to raise. And what I find that this approach can sometimes neglect is that these are human beings, and we are having a relationship with these human beings. Parenting is not something that we do. It's not a verb. It's more like it's always about the relationship that we are establishing with these children, and it's very unique, child to child as well. These relationships are founded on many different things. Probably the most important thing that I could say a parent could do to really learn how to empower their child is to do the deep dive into looking into your own past and understanding what experiences did I have in my life that have shaped who I am today and shape who I am becoming in my journey as being a parent. So in infant mental health, we call that our ghosts in our nursery and our angels in our nursery. My ghosts are those experiences, those negative life experiences that made me feel unsafe in some way. These might be the different traumas that we have faced that maybe made me feel unloved, or maybe made me feel not seen, not validated, not cared for. And then how does that come up on a day-to-day basis in relationship with my child? So a very big example that is presented so much in my practice with young children is power and control. Children are naturally seeking power and control. They are naturally seeking autonomy. They're naturally seeking independence. They are loud because they want their voice to be heard. It is something I love and adore about children. They are unrestrained about how they take up a room and how they are in a room. There is something so incredibly beautiful about that. And yet, how many of us feel the need to quiet our child? Feel the need to have our child be seen and not heard. Feel the need to control our child. We have this social cultural conditioning that makes us believe that there is something inherently wrong with how a child takes up space and how a child expresses their need for power and control. And I believe that a lot of this comes down to what ways were we stripped of our own power and our own need for control in childhood, and how are we triggered and then acting out our triggers, or even projecting our own micro trauma onto our children just in a day-to-day basis. We're all guilty of it. It doesn't matter how conscious you are. You could be the most Mary Poppins and perfect of parent. You probably have done something to strip your child of their need for power and control.
Oh, Bryana, I'm pretty sure I did it last night, like
yeah.
on a nightly basis. I'm like, oh my God, I did that thing. And I try to remedy it. And I think there is a resolve for it, right? There is a active resolve for that which we're again, either generationally passing on or subconsciously doing, or again, maybe I want control. I want some control in my life because COVID came and I want control.
I really identify with that. I think that's been my biggest challenge with parenting, is recognizing that I'm basically a control freak with most things in my life. And
I love that about her.
And my children fall into my life. And so having this constant, battle of almost like these out of body experiences where I act a certain way, and then afterwards I'm like, well, where did that come from? And why did I respond that way? And why do I feel this need to like almost like rage will sometimes come out of me when I do a fairly good job not projecting it on them, but I can feel it when I feel out of control with them. And I'm like, wow, how do I approach this when I'm feeling this need to control my child, but recognizing that they're just essentially he's being a 4-year-old.
Yes, this is such a good point, because that rage that you are feeling in response to your child expressing a need for power and control doesn't have anything to do with your child.
Oh my God.
That has to do with you and all of us, because this is such a universal experience. All of us in different opportunities of our child being raised, experiences of being stripped of our needs for power and stripped of our needs for control. Absolutely, it made you feel rageful. Absolutely, it made you feel angry as a child. And most likely, if you were born in the 80s and earlier, you were probably sent to your room to be alone with your anger and with your rage, and you were, with your immature brain development, told to figure it out on your own. And now as an adult, the moment we become triggered, by the way, we go back, we revert back to whatever, whatever earlier stages of unresolved trauma, unresolved grief and things like that we might have. So now I have my little child expressing a need for power and control, and suddenly my brain flips back into the same place, the same disempowered place. We're talking about empowering our children, so we must talk about ways that we were disempowered and how that influences how we might be accidentally disempowering our children. And Victoria, you are correct that there is always room for repair. What I think a lot of parents mistake is that they believe that parenting is about perfection, and parenting is not about perfection. Parenting is about reflection.
Mm.
Will I notice? Can I notice if, whether it's in the moment or outside of the moment? Wow, that moment where I noticed that I was acting out my own rage in some way, acting it out in some way over my child, and I didn't feel good to me, and it didn't feel good to my child. Now I'm going to have the repair. We want to talk about empowering our children. We want to talk about empowering our kids. We must repair the mistakes that we make with our children. There is nothing like a moment of a parent honoring their weakness, honoring their misstep, because what this is excellent modeling that we do for a child of any age. I do not care if they are a young little child, if they are a full-grown adult child. You honor what you did to mess up, you are going to give that child the grace and the strength and the courage to do the exact same when they go out into the world. So maybe we look at empowerment differently. I look at empowerment as having courage to be vulnerable, strength to recognize what you need, and learning how to get those needs met in a way that does not hurt other people. We don't need to bulldoze others to get our needs met. And so I don't know, am I communicating this well? I know
I love that definition of empowerment you just gave. And that is really actually a great place to kind of start this is we talk about empowerment, and I think that definition might change for different people in terms of what their objective is and feeling powerful. But when we talk about children, I love, and really for anyone, I love that approach and that definition. And I think that, the challenge that so many parents are feeling, and I can relate to this, is this constant kind of balance between having order, right? Order in our household, and setting boundaries ourselves and limits with our children, but also creating, allowing our children to voice their opinion so it's like, how do you have order in a household, or, create limits, but then yet still raise a child who speaks their voice and, is willing to set their own boundaries and kind of resist yours at some time. So what's the balance there, and what does that look like?
It's a fantastic question. It's kind of like a democracy. So in democracy, you have an elected leader. I'm not going to make this about our elected leader, but I'm sure you guys know how I feel about that. But in democracy, we have an elected leader. And so if we're going to relate this to the family, the parents are the leaders. And then we have constituents. Constituents discuss with their leaders what they'd like going on in their community. It is up to the leaders to make the final decisions and then lead. And that is what we're trying to do as, in these more democratic homes. Our children are our constituents. They are expressing to us what they would prefer to happen. And they are expressing to us what their needs are, and what their wants are, and what their desires are. That's empowering in and of itself, knowing that my voice is being heard, my voice is being honored. And then we get the opportunity to discuss with our children whether or not that is something that can be honored in this moment. And there's an approach to go about that's helpful. It's helpful to meet our children with a sense of empathy. I love empathy for empowering children. Thank you for sharing with me your ideas. These are really important ideas, and I'm going to consider them. Or, my love, I understand that you want an extra sport this season. And I know all of your friends are doing that extra sport. This semester, it's something our family is not able to do. And I know that's a really big bummer. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So now I'm creating an atmosphere to have conversations around our child expressing their wishes and their wants and their boundaries and their needs. But as the parent, it is my job to guide and to lead. And a good leader listens and inspires. We don't rule with an iron fist.
Sure.
A good leader also doesn't just let the children run the household.
Okay,
That's not effectively. Sorry.
That was my next question, because I tend to be a people pleaser by nature. I tend to acquiesce to the requests of my constituents, and they ask what they want for dinner, when they want it. They want breakfast, lunch, and dinner their way. And because I'm like, well, they got to eat, right? So I'm going to make sure that they eat. I can feel myself leaning more towards pleasing them rather than holding strong. Whereas my husband is the polar opposite. He's like, nope, this is what's for breakfast. Bye. So how do we balance that in the household with boundaries and understanding that is, important?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question. And when we're talking about feeding children, there is a whole science around it. Very much recommend that the audience watching look up Ellen Satter.
Yes, I love her.
She is so tremendous in her beautiful book, Child of Mine. But ultimately, in everything, there's going to be a division of responsibility, okay, between children and their parents. And when it comes to feeding, the division of responsibility is I, as your parent, get to decide what you eat, when you eat, and where you eat. And the child gets to decide how much and whether. Now, your kids are a little bit older. Your kids are 5 and 7. So they're going to have a lot more input, let's say, at your family meeting for what meals are going to look like over the next week than, let's say, my 2-year-old, right? My 2-year-old is not going to have a ton of input. He's going to choose between strawberries and blueberries. But can we have a family meeting each week? And if there is a specific food item that they'd really like to have this week, let's put it on the menu. But once the menu is set, the menu is set. And here's the reason. Because you know that your people pleasing is being triggered. People pleasing, it's such an important word, extremely universal. Resentment can start to come underneath these people pleasing tendencies that we have. And resentment it's kind of like the quiet like a little fox in the night. It's very, very quiet, and then suddenly it pounces on you, and it comes out in ways that you really wish that it wouldn't come out. And so I really like parents to assess and notice, I'm being triggered right now. My need to please, my need to acquiesce, my need to let my child, run the show because I want to respect their choices. It's different from I'm the leader of the house, and this is what is happening in our house. And it's my job to help my child learn how to be a little flexible and learn how to be in that as well. So I think there can be some give and take. Maybe embracing a little bit of flexibility is very helpful, and that might help you and dad kind of come to the center here. And this issue, for anybody watching that maybe feeding isn't part of your problem, a lot of the times parents are on two separate ends of the spectrum. One is very, let's say, pro spanking, pro yelling, pro timeouts, and the other one is pro coddling and never hitting and never doing timeouts. And the answer is not who's right and who's wrong, but the answer is actually usually somewhere in the center where we're creating our own family cultural ideals and beliefs.
Beautiful. That's such a great point. And I would love to take that idea of the cultural beliefs then to consent. I was raised in a very big understanding in a culture where, when family members would come over, it was this idea of hug uncle, hug auntie, hug grandma, hug grandpa. That's because we hug because we love them, because that's what they want. And that's what we do. And I know that that's something that many families can relate to, this idea that we give away our child's bodily autonomy almost before they even have a say as to whether they can give it or not.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm hearing is that part of, when we talk about raising empowered children, it's difficult when, from a very young age, they are not given much autonomy and their voice is not being heard. And then all of a sudden at age 18, you're like, go stand up for yourself. Or when they're 12 years old and go into middle school, it's now start to use your voice when their voice has never really been respected or heard. And so it sounds like we're kind of like the first models in terms of developing those skills and the ability to, you know, set boundaries, and then recognize sometimes you might do that and it still won't work, right? But at least that they're learning how to exercise that muscle. And so along this line of consent, that's another way to, you know, because I think that when it comes to children standing up for themselves, and I know specifically for young girls, although this also affects young boys as well, but that is one of the biggest questions is, again, how do I teach them to stand up for themselves and their bodies? And this is such a great point that, you know, when it comes to this idea of consent, and this idea that people have to ask you before they touch your body, and that's essentially what consent is, right? And then how do we model that from a very young age? And then, you know, how do we implement that in our household, so that then when they're 21, they still have that same belief of like, nope, this is my body and you have to ask me first, or I have to give you permission to be able to touch that.
I was a little extreme too, Bryana. You might laugh at this. Whenever I would hold my child and someone's like, let me hold her, I would go like this and see if my child leaned towards them or not. And if my child didn't lean, I'd be like, oh, it looks like she's not interested right now. But that's such a difference. And when I remember even being a little younger, people would just pass around a baby like it was like a hot potato. But I was just so like, oh, what do I do with this here?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No, that's not it. That's not extreme at all. And that is really, if you read any of Magda Gerber's writings from the Rye parenting philosophy, it was something that she professed. Oh gosh, when is her writing from? Early, I think 1900s or something. She's been it's just very old writings, but still very, very relevant. What she was professing was, we need to ask permission to touch our children, and that babies, newborns, are able to give consent, and they give consent by reaching for you, by looking at you, or by pulling away and saying with their body language, no, this is not something that I want. Many, many parents come to me, even when their child is 5, 6, 7 months. My child doesn't want to be held by anybody. They only want to be held by me. And you hear that the implication there is that it's a problem.
Yeah.
It's not a problem that a 5-month-old finds safety and comfort in the arms of his or her parent. This is a good thing. This is what we want to develop and foster in our children. I do find that lots of people, as you know, our generation is changing, and many parents now are recognizing how uncomfortable it feels to ask a child to hug and kiss even an extended relative, or to sit on somebody's lap if they're clearly trying to escape and trying to get off of that person's lap. But it is a cultural expectation in a lot of family homes. So if this is something that you want to challenge, you want to change, it really starts with you being the voice for your child at a very young age, and recognizing, oh, you know, Mateo, that's my son. Mateo, I see you don't want to sit with Amma and Appa right now. All right, how about you show them something that you'd like to do? And he'll almost always go and get a toy that he wants to play with them. And that is how he is consenting to be in relationship with them. So let me define for you guys what boundaries are, because I think this is also important. A lot of the times we look at boundaries as a wall, as something that we set up between us to protect us from the person or the thing that's going to come and hurt us. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes we do need to have our guard up because there is an actual intruder. But for the most part, there isn't. For the most part, what we're using boundaries to do is to actually build a bridge. And this bridge is like a contract that's saying, this is how we get to be in relationship with each other. And now, as parents, especially parents of very young children, we are the voice for the voiceless. We are watching our child's cues, noticing our child's behaviors, and we are speaking to that to those who maybe are not as attuned, to those who maybe are not as understanding of what our child is trying to communicate. If our child is saying, I don't want you to feed me with a spoon, that can be a boundary issue, that can be a consent issue, actually, then I encourage parents, put down the spoon and put the food in front of your child and see, is your child more interested in self-feeding? As our children get older and they want to, let's say, let's say the grandma and grandpa example, and they don't want to hug grandma or grandpa, we feel a pressure to apologize for our child's misstep, as if our child's boundaries and their need for consent is negative, is bad. This is culturally, socially informed. The word that we use to describe it is called childism. And childism is essentially it's a prejudice that we all have that makes us believe that our child's responsibility is to meet our unmet needs, to please the adult. Children are not required to meet our needs. Children are not required to be obedient. The very nature of childhood is disobedience. That's actually what makes childhood so amazing. And that's why the world keeps changing, really, truly, because of disobedient children who do not listen to what their parents say and go off and create and become innovative and change things. It brings us back to power and control, but I'll stay on consent with you, ladies. So if I instead acknowledge that my child is not interested at this moment, but I'll give you a hug, Grandpa. Or what about your stuffed animal? Is your stuffed animal interested in giving Grandpa a hug? Many times children will let Grandpa hug the stuffed animal, and that might encourage them. Child doesn't want to give Grandpa a kiss? No problem. I'm going to blow kisses to Grandpa. Children will often say, that feels good to me. I'm happy to blow kisses. I'm going to give Grandma a high five. Children will be very interested in trying a high five. So we can actually empower our children by giving them even alternatives to connect. Again, not to please the adult, but to honor that this child's words and behaviors matter and somebody is listening and bolstering that and affirming that.
Yeah, Bryana, what I'm hearing you say is that by giving our children alternative options of connection, they can feel empowered to then make choices from them. And what I found is that many times where either I or people around me have divulged their discomfort with, the situation of the child not giving grandma or grandpa or uncle or auntie a hug, was they can see that their parents are pawning for love. And they want the child, like, give them the love that they deserve, that they want. There's almost like this idea that maybe it is, again, the people pleaser in me. Like, my people pleaser self wants my mom to feel the love that my daughters bring out of her. And I know that if they just run over and even just kiss her hand, that she will be like, overjoyed. And because we maybe are so wrapped up with wanting everyone to be happy in the room that we almost, like you say, sorry, usually she's a lot more helpful than this, or we make these accommodations. Like, what is it about us that we do that?
And yeah. I love that example you gave, or just like that option of recognizing that oftentimes it is our need of saying, like, my grandma just flew out here and I really want you to hug her because it would make her day, and then, but recognizing maybe there's something we can do to fulfill that need that we want to do, because we have a relationship like that. So maybe I love that option of, like, we might not want to, but I want to give grandma a hug, and then you can give grandma a hug, or whoever that is. So I love these, like, other options that you're bringing.
And maybe even asking our child, okay, how would you like to show grandma that you love her right now? Or how would you like to show grandma that you appreciate her? There's so many more ways than just giving a hug or a kiss. That the physical affection, from the need for physical affection from children is again a part of childism. It's an expectation that we have for children, that they are physically affectionate, which denies that maybe this particular child isn't in this particular moment. And that's okay. Or maybe this particular child temperamentally is not this way in relationship with others. Maybe they show affection by making cards. Maybe they show affection by sharing toys, by sharing ideas, by inviting grandma to watch them, cook in the kitchen because I just learned how to make mac and cheese. And I want you to see that, grandma. No problem. Can we honor that is, I guess, my question. Can we honor that human beings are not robots and children are not robots? They do not fit into a certain kind of box that we typically expect them to fit into. And as the parent, can I allow myself to embrace who this child is showing me that they are, instead of who I need you to be, who I expect you to be, who I believe I'm raising you to be? I'm raising a very kind, affectionate, loving daughter who greets every person that comes to the house with a hug and a kiss and asks them if they need a glass of water. That's wonderful. Do that. Instill those values in your children if those are values that you have. Just don't expect it. That's, I guess, my message. Don't expect it. And then don't fault your child if they push back and say, that's actually not who I feel I am. And that's okay. So tell me, child, who are you? I'm listening. That's what I want to encourage parents to do.
I love that. Listening. That's a great start. I love so kind of going on the same path of like who you want your child, as you're saying, this is the type of child I want to raise, right? And looking deeper into why that is and what that looks like and who your child actually is versus who you want your child to be. But I think that, along those lines, all of us have some like very basic expectations and hopes for our children. And again, coming to the other question that we get asked often as self-defense instructors is, what can I do to make sure my child isn't the one who is hurting other people? And, that is one thing that I think, as far as expectations that we can have of our children, we all are striving to be that. Is like, at least I want my child to not grow up and hurt others or hurt others, as they come of age.
And when they do hurt, we do take it upon, we do feel hugely at fault. We take on the weight of my child did the bullying thing, is the kid in the class slapping or taking all the books, or grew up to be someone who potentially assaulted another woman. So we really identify with the actions of our children. So, and I think we do that because we do feel a responsibility of what is, in fact, Bryana, our ability to have like a changeable thing in their life. Like how can we impact them? And what is our responsibility as parents in the prevention of their life choices?
Wow. It's a really, really big question. And there's like two important branches that I can think of in this moment. The first branch that I thought of was hurt people hurt other people. And then the second branch that I thought of was, we don't have as much power and influence as we like to believe we have over our children. That at some point, we have to accept that our children are autonomous beings and do have free will and are going to make decisions and choices that will displease us, that will disappoint us, that will make us say these following words: I didn't raise you to do this. We will all say that at some point in our parenting journey. Now, there's many reasons why a child might become a bully, let's say, or why a man might assault a woman. There's an infinite number of reasons. We could have a history of trauma in either of those cases. We could have a history of shame-based interactions, where the only way to deal with that shame is to project that shame onto someone else, to behave in such a shameful way. There could be, underlying problems also, just in terms of how that person understands the world around them. I'm talking like some neurological possible things that might be going on for that person. So what I like to suggest is a need-based parenting approach. Like I said earlier, we don't necessarily have as much power and as much influence and as much control over who our children become as we would like to believe that we have. But what we do have some agency over is learning how to recognize and understand the needs of our child and to get those needs met so that our child can then internalize their own ability to get their needs met so that they do not require other people to get their needs met in these more aggressive and shame-based ways. Mm-hmm. In terms of hurt people, hurt other people.
Sorry, before we go on to that, let's go back to these needs. So when you talk about the needs, the needs that need to be met, what do you find are the most common actual needs of children when we talk about focusing on the needs that they have?
Probably the most important need is the need for connection, the need to feel safe, seen, heard, validated, loved, understood. It is a fundamental human need that, I had a professor once say to me, we're all born attached to another person, our mother, via the umbilical cord. And the moment they sever that cord, we spend the rest of our lives seeking that level of deep connection.
Oh, wow. I think you just hit me with all my life issues right now. Done.
It's fundamental. It is fundamental. Anybody who is acting out, especially acting out in a way where they are hurting others, it is because they are hurting. It is because they are feeling a deep sense of disconnection. They are feeling a deep sense of isolation, of loneliness, of probably deep grief, deep sadness, deep shame. And so if I can respond to the need for connection, how can I see that in my child? How can I rewire my brain to see my child's emotional outbursts as not an act of defiance like we do, but instead as a plea for connection? Can I rewire my brain to see that? And that will transform us. So we've got this need for connection that is fundamental, starts from the very beginning, the moment we come out of the womb. And then the second need that I find to be really common, especially as children become older, 3 and up, is that need, again, for power and control. That need for autonomy, that need for competency, that need for self-mastery, and that need for self-confidence. So what am I doing to bolster those needs in my child? Am I creating an environment and giving my child opportunities to build a sense of mastery and competence, to feel good about who they are, not just what they do? We have a problem with only praising children for productivity and achievement and outcome, which we know by research actually reduces self-esteem. But am I acknowledging who my child is and teaching them to appreciate that? This is going to help lead them to a little bit more self-esteem. People with high self-esteem who feel good about themselves genuinely are going to be less likely to engage in these kinds of behaviors that you guys have referenced.
So now that I'm ready for you to adopt me,
can we just do this whole thing over
again?
Let's just be children
start
again.
Over. Did that finish up your point on when you were saying how hurt people? I want to make sure that we got to go back to that for you.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's good enough.
Cool. Yeah. What I'm curious is that when, I loved how you said we have to rewire our brain to see defiance And instead of it looking at, oh, this child needs punishment, to recognize that our child's need connection. But, and I remember, like, with both of my boys at some point being like it's scary to, you know, especially with my youngest is almost 2. And I remember when my 5-year-old was probably around the same age, like 1.5, and they'll just like hit you and laugh. And I'm like, oh my God, am I raising a sociopath? Like, is this happening? Is this my worst nightmare come true? And so we automatically see violence and we freak out about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you know, now I'm also having to, obviously what we do for a living is engage in physical interaction and wrestling and jujitsu. And so having, you know, finding this kind of balance of healthy physical interaction between my boys, of wrestling and, you know, figuring out what those boundaries are, but also making sure that they don't think it's okay to just hit people or be violent. And at what age I can start to have some of these other expectations and recognizing, oh, like my 2-year-old just hit my 4-year-old because he had a toy, doesn't necessarily mean he's a sociopath and that he's going to, you know, grow up hurting people. So I guess what I'm asking is, first of all, what, in terms of when it comes to age appropriate behavior, like at what age can we really start to expect our children to understand violence, and when it is, you know, it's never okay to hurt somebody, but when we can actually start expecting that of them? Mm-hmm. And then when they are, how do we respond to that? Like, you know, because, well, I can go further, but let's start there.
So really great questions. Usually around 3 years old is when we can have a reasonable expectation that children have a little bit more self-control. They're able to stop their bodies and they're able to behave in less impulsive ways. Like, this kid has my toy, I'm going to hit you to get my toy. So 3 years old and up is kind of a benchmark. And of course that depends on a number of factors. I need to make sure and assess that if a child older than 3 is still hitting impulsively, does this child have some underlying sensory needs? So I didn't want to get into that in the first need conversation because, you know, it can get a little nuanced. But does this child have some underlying sensory needs, particularly around proprioception? So proprioception is knowing where my body is in time and space, and having an awareness of that. And so our 2-year-olds, they're still developing a lot. They're still developing their proprioception skills. So they might hit impulsively because they actually didn't realize that your body was there, right? They're just moving their hand and then suddenly their hand is on your body and it's like, oh, whoa, I had no idea that your body was there. But at 3, it can start to be, you know, a little bit more willful, but we do want to make sure that there is an underlying sensory issue.
On that note, I will say that is one thing that we actually have had great success with, is people who have sensory needs, or I forget the appropriate word you just used. I've never heard it in that term, but how jujitsu can help that, because ultimately you're actually learning how to use your body in different ways and in non-violent ways of hitting, and you recognize where your body ends and the other person's begins, and what that connection is between the two of
and
them.
the strength of your own body. Some children don't even recognize that their body has so much power. Like my older daughter, she's 7 and she plays with Haven, who's 4, and she pushes him, and I'm like, you're powerful, little one, like, understand it. But she has to almost see, oh my gosh, my push throws him across the room. I have impact, I have power. It's almost like she needed to feel that first.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there is some learning on the go for children when it comes to recognizing their own physical strength. Hitting is, you know, children hitting and children aggressing. While I do tend to see it a little bit more in boys. I believe this is because we socialize boys to, you know, we dismiss their emotions more. Research has shown that we look at boys in the eye, newborn baby boys in the eyes, less than we do little girls. Research has shown that we carry little boys facing outward, whereas we carry little girls facing inward. Research has shown that we tend to be rough with little boys. There tends to be more rough housing and more just like physical interventions with little boys, whereas with little girls, we tend to coddle them more. We tend to be softer, gentler with little girls more. So there's a lot of socialization that comes in that then, teaches our little boys that this is how you'll behave. And don't even get me started on phrases like boys will be boys, that actually encourages boys to be impulsive and encourages boys to not have any real responsibility or accountability for how it is that they are behaving. And then we see that play out even in our older years, where we ask girls who were assaulted, well, what were you wearing? Well, what were you doing by yourself? Why were you walking by yourself? We put the impetus on the girl to defend herself from the male aggressor. So how do we intervene? How do we stop this from the beginning? How do we teach something different? Well, it really starts with teaching our sons and our daughters accountability for their behaviors. So if a 3-year-old is going into the playground and wants something out of the sandbox and bulldozes a bunch of kids to get it, now it's my opportunity to meet my child's need and to teach my child. In that moment, they were out of control. That's why they bulldozed. So they have a need for control. I am going to let you borrow my prefrontal cortex, the front part of my brain. I'm going to pull you over to the side. We're going to have a little seat on that bench. And in this moment, we're going to do some co-regulating, where I'm going to let you borrow this so that you can bring your brain back online. You can think before you do, and then we're going to do over. We're going to try it again. This is not just something we do with 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds. This is something that we are repeatedly doing over the course of our children's lives. We are teaching them that there is always an opportunity to redo, to learn from our past mistakes and try again. It doesn't have to be such rocket science. It can really truly be this simple. So
you mentioned something to me that I think I need to instill in my marriage. This co-regulating, as well as just the idea of getting another chance. Like when I think of this, I think of discipline, right? And I would love to go into what you think about discipline, but for me, and when I go with my children, I'm like, discipline has a twofold meaning to me. It's both where people are like, I have the discipline not to touch the food that I know will make my body unhealthy in the long term, but I also have the discipline to model behavior, to be this, what was the word we used before? Disciple, this figure of this is what I do and you can follow me on this. But my children, it's kind of, I don't want to say scary for me, but a little bit like concerning sometimes when I want to discipline, but then I'm like, I want to have compassion for their dysregulation. So I'm even in a little bit of like I feel for you, but you can't do that again. And what is that balance when it comes to discipline and helping the dysregulated child come back to it? I love how you say, borrow my prefrontal cortex. I think I need to borrow that with some other adults I know as well. But how does that work for you? Like when you think of discipline, what is your mindset on discipline? And how does that interlace with that regulation of emotions?
Yeah. So discipline comes from the word disciple, which means to teach and to follow. So our goal in discipline is actually guiding and teaching our children. Now, socially and culturally, almost every single one of us are conditioned to see discipline as a punishment, as consequences, as something that is punitive. But I like to look at discipline as an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to re-engage. So we are balancing this. I know that you need some co-regulation with, and this is what it is that I expect you to do. And there's nothing inappropriate about informing our children about how to behave appropriately, teaching our children about socially appropriate behaviors, for example. Or the other, extremely harsh and strong and hard. You never do this again. Now go to your room. Or we have to be the total other side of it, which is, I'm not even going to talk to you about your missteps. I'm just going to hold you and love you and tell you that everything's going to be okay. I like to get right down into the center, right? I'm more Mary Poppins, right? You need to take your medicine. Here's a spoonful of sugar to help the medicine taste a little bit better. Same exact thing when we're disciplining our child and they have a misstep. So we'll use your example where your older daughter kind of shoved the little boy. All right, so in her playing, this is a moment. This is a discipline moment. It's a teaching moment. It does not have to be a shaming moment. What are you doing? Don't you know how strong you are? Why would you do that? That is wrong. You could have hurt him, right? Now I've just shamed her. But also, wow, I noticed that your body is really, really strong. And you were playing, and when you got hands on, you knocked him across the room. And now here's the discipline. Let's check in with him and see how he's doing. So discipline does not have to always be a negative critique of a person, but it can be giving them guidance on this is how you deal with your missteps. Go and check in, see how they're doing. And I know your children are older, a 7 and a 4-year-old, they can work on problem solving. What do you two kids want to do next time to either prevent this problem, or how would you two kids like to solve this problem? And even that's also discipline. Encouraging our children to solve some problems.
Yeah.
So it really is a mental shift that I'm inviting everybody to partake upon. Seeing discipline in this new light really does transform our relationships, and I believe it is a relationship informed way of working with our children and raising them to be the empowered kiddos that we love them to be.
So it sounds like when it comes to empowering our children to not cause harm to others, as they come into adulthood, and even as children, it comes down to one, modeling, right? And then also you address hurt people, right? So this idea of trauma, and people who have experienced trauma will then inflict their trauma on others. And I think that obviously this is something we've discussed before, but specifically with boys, because boys aren't often taught tools to cope with trauma, then it's never really dealt with. And so then as they grow up, they find other ways to inflict that on other people. So I guess in terms of even from a, as a parent who is raising, and I'm just talking as a parent who's raising 2 boys, right? Mm-hmm. So recognizing that, as much as I want to say, hey, I'm raising my boys the same way I would raise girls, I don't actually know that. I don't have girls. Yeah. So I don't know if I am, again, I'm also socially conditioned, being raised a certain way, seeing certain behaviors, having, other influences.
And feeding off the child. Like with the boys, you're rough with them sometimes because they're rough. They want to play rough.
Yeah. And I was rough as a child too. I had a lot of energy, not rough, but I had a lot of energy. There's a lot of physical activity for us. And so I guess the question is, how do we give our, how do we make sure that we are emphasizing that our boys are learning how to cope with any trauma that they experience in their life, so that they don't continue to pass that on to others?
Yeah. I mean, great question. And this would apply to parents of girls as well. Because when trauma itself is not necessarily problematic, it's problematic when it is unresolved, and then we make it someone else's problem. And so for anybody, boys and girls, and anyone who identifies differently, if you have experienced trauma, we've got to go to therapy. We've got to learn some tools to process what we have experienced and do what we call creating a coherent narrative. So children, adults too, but especially children, don't create clear, coherent stories of the different things that they have experienced. And one of the ways that we heal through trauma is by creating a clear, cohesive narrative about what has happened to us and make meaning of it. And what is particularly helpful is to notice in a moment when I am triggered, is this triggering moment connected at all to my past, to the experiences that I have had? I'll personalize it though for you guys so that this is a little bit so it's not so theoretical. I have a significant trauma background. My mom was pretty abusive physically, emotionally, psychologically from the ages of 2 to 14. So for 12 years, when she stopped, when the abuse stopped, I was old enough and strong enough at this point to actually push her away. And my force, I had held in 12 years of never hitting back. My force was so strong that I actually sent her flying across the room. And it really dawned on me in that moment that like something is wrong here. I hadn't recognized at that point that because it was so normalized what I had experienced and what I witnessed my siblings experience. I kept it in the back of my mind, tried not to, did some theater and things to cope and to deal with it. But it wasn't until I went to college that I recognized that I had a lot of underlying anger issues, that I had a lot of issues with processing experiences of abandonment, of rejection, of pain, that I immediately took these experiences as assaults to my integrity, to my dignity, to my sense of safety, both physical and emotional. So it was a very strong psychological response. And even in becoming a parent, I have recognized and noticed how these experiences of having been beat and abused as a child really come up for me a lot when I see my child being big and being strong and being his whole self, and recognizing those are things that I was beat for. I have memories. I see my kid doing things and I have memories of me being beat for doing those exact things that my child was doing. That is trauma. Now, if this trauma was unresolved, I would act my trauma out by beating my child. If this trauma, now because my trauma is resolved and I am aware of it and I notice it and I can recognize it coming through me in the moment, I don't have to make it my child's problem. That's my story, not his story. And so when we're raising our children, being aware of what is mine, what's my story? And my story, I don't need to make my child carry my burden of my past. That was something I had to carry. Bryana, I had to carry that. I carried my mom's trauma and my grandma's trauma and my great-grandma's trauma and my great-great-grandma's trauma. I literally have ancestral trauma on my back that I'm constantly processing because someone has to do it. And if we are the ones who do it, if we are the ones who do that hard work, it's not going to be our kids who are going to have to take that burden on. So I really encourage parents, if you have experienced trauma, please get yourself into some therapy. If your child has experienced some trauma, either get them into some therapy or give them an opportunity to process what they have experienced out loud in a safe, non-judgmental, supportive, empathic, and loving environment.
Bryana, you hit everything. My gosh, that was amazing. I absolutely agree. I think we should destigmatize all sorts of therapy. I think every one of us has something that we haven't processed and could really benefit.
And I think that's one of the beautiful and scary parts of parenting is that it brings up it's like you can't even stop it. It comes up and it's right there in front of you. Yeah. And then if you're not recognizing this as a part of your past and working through that, then it's going to continue. It's going to continue to just be there.
We went through everything from just basics, discipline, to childism, to even we brought the ancestors into this talk here. We brought our moms and our grandmas and our sisters. Bryana, we want to thank you so much for giving us so much of your valuable experience and information and tactics, as well as reflections on how we can be the best parents we can be to live a harmonious life that we want to with our children, that we are gifted to even have this time with. And I try to reshape my perspective on this all the time. They are a gift to me. They are a reflection for me of the growth that I need to do at this moment, and not a burden and a nuisance of they're not trying to hurt me or get mad at me. They're really just trying to find themselves within and around the environment that I've created for them. So I want to thank you for sharing again a lot of your expertise on this, and for divulging some really beautiful ways of looking at it. The bridge boundary thing.
I love that definition.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of this. But Bryana, can you tell us where everyone can find you? if they want to seek your services or just find out more information.
And talk about your groups real quick.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so you can find me at on Instagram. I'm at South Bay Mommy and Me. All of my classes are geared for parents birth to 5. I have Mommy and Me and Toddler and Me that goes up to 24 months. And then we have parenting workshops that promote these same kinds of concepts that we're talking about today, that are geared for parents of children 2 to 5. And then I also have a private practice. My private practice is called Child Parent Connection, and you can find that information at Child Parent Connection RB, as in Redondo Beach.com. And there you can learn a little bit about how, if you are seeking some therapy, how you can get connected to some therapeutic services. Yeah, that's me. That's everything that I have to offer. And I've really, really loved this opportunity. I thank both of you for taking me on and allowing us to have these important conversations. For me, these are so normal. This is like the only thing I think about and talk about all the time. But I recognize and understand that these are new concepts for a lot of folks. So it just warms me so much that that we're opening up to a new, evolved way of being in relationship with ourselves and our children. So I'm very, very grateful. Thank you both.
And thank you so much, Bryana. I wanted to put us back both up here so we can just say goodbye together. And we really appreciate everybody's time here today and for coming to Women Empowered Live. We hope you subscribe down below. We still can't figure out where the things are.
Subscribe button. It's
subscribe down here somewhere.
We're going to have Bryana's information in the show notes. So we'll add those there to the comments, so you guys can check her out.
Thank you guys so much again, and we'll see you next week. Bye.